This meeting is being recorded.
All right, so we welcome everybody to our general metastatic cancer support group. And tonight we have Elizabeth Schandelmeier, and she is an LCSW and an APHSW C. She's a bereavement coordinator and counselor for family hospice and provides support to patients and their circles of support before and after death. We provide bereavement training for MD palliative fellows through the Palliative Supportive Institute and education for staff and in hospital and community settings. She's a recognized grief expert and is helping to produce a series of podcasts, which you have to get in touch with. She's been amazing on them, on topics related to grief. She serves as a facilitator for the Social Work Hospice and Palliative Care Network Bereavement Special Interest Group and facilitates support groups for family hospice. She also runs a group for us for people living with malignant brain tumors through Cancer Bridges. And she's been a good friend of mine for a long time. She was a part of the palliative and supportive service team at UPMC Presbyterian Hospital, where she provided therapeutic and practical support for families through end of life and decision making. And Elizabeth currently provides private practice therapy, focusing exclusively on death, dying, grief, and loss through the Howling Lion Grief. So that's her own private practice that she has now. So we welcome you, Elizabeth, and I'm glad that you're here to speak about a very important topic that comes up a lot with all of us. So welcome.
Thank you so much. And Jonathan, thank you for sharing that about your mom. It's not an easy time, but thank you for sharing. So some of you may be wondering why a bereavement person would be coming and speaking at a group for people who are living with cancer. And it's because what I find is that when folks are facing situations that are, where some kind of prognosis is discussed or thoughts of terminal, anytime, the big C, as we used to call it back in the day, what really happens is that folks begin to start to contemplate life. And people often ask me, how do you do the work that you do? And I try to explain that it's full of so much joy, because again, it's about finding life in whatever time it is that we have. And in some circumstances, we know, in other circumstances we don't know, but the space that all of you are in with living with a cancer diagnosis is a very special one. In fact, one of the podcasts that I recently did speaks to this exactly, but what I found when I was doing the podcast was that I was talking about this, what I called a gray area in between, sort of in the bereavement world, we talk about death losses, and that's of course when somebody dies, and then we also talk about non-death losses, and non-death losses are typically thought of things such as, if you're divorcing and loss of sort of the life that you had, or if you're moving and you miss your neighbors or your neighborhood and your life changes, but the space where you all are living is neither of those places really. And so it's this sort of what we call a gray area, but I don't really like thinking of it as a gray area because that seems so gloomy. So what I've started calling it is a twilight grief. It's somewhere in between the really brightness of day when, we're all healthy and, feel like we're out ruling the world, and the nighttime, which will come to all of us at some point. So this period of twilight, there's some melancholy to it. We know that our days are eventually going to come to an end. Things are changing, things are shifting, but at the same time, there's lots and lots of moments of beauty. Twilight's actually a really gorgeous part of the day. And so I think it's not such a horrible place to be as gray would sort of imply, sort of flat. But I think that the social supports that we have in place for folks who are moving through this twilight, there's not a whole lot of them. I'm glad that Cancer Bridges is one place that people can turn to. But not everybody finds that their sort of medical providers are able to provide the support and acknowledgement of all the different changes that can happen in people's lives. Our medical teams are typically much more focused on treatment, how to extend life, how to keep you healthy enough to remain in treatment, or how to monitor you, survivorship, how, when to check in, how to check in, which tests do you need, and all of these kinds of things that are, of course, super important, but don't really necessarily address the needs of the person who's undergoing it, or the family or the support network that you're living within. So that's what I was sort of hoping to talk about today. And I'm very happy to sit here and I can talk about this stuff all day long. But I think more important than that is that I address, or try to address, anything that you all would like to talk about and talk to. So please, at any time, interrupt me, disagree with me. That's also fine. Talk to each other. This is your support group, and I appreciate the invitation to be a part of it. But I want to make sure that any questions or anything that you were hoping to talk about also can find space in this time. So with that said, I'm going to open up my sort of little chat box here. And so if anybody, feels inspired to write or ask or put your hand up, then please just let me know. But what I have found with the folks that I'm talking to through a cancer diagnosis is that there are these changes that occur both in their bodies, in their life, body, mind, spirit. Sometimes it is, moving from getting sort of what we all, I think, would consider to be very bad news. What do you do with that news? How does it impact your relationships? How does it impact your life? How does it impact who you are out in the world, but also even in the private space of yourself in your own body? And how can we develop a new relationship with who we are becoming, especially since that is often changing? And people often don't really like to use the word grief in this space. And I think that's because so often we think of grief only in terms of death and dying. And so it feels uncomfortable to use that word when we're not really talking about death and dying here. We're really talking about living. So part of this is to hopefully provide some language that you can use when thinking about this, your own situation yourself, but also when you're thinking about your relationship with other people, and maybe even some language that you can use with your medical providers to say, hey, I really appreciate all of the medical care that you're giving me, but there's more than just that. And here's some things that I might like to talk about, or some more resources, or, hey, are you making sure that you tell all of your patients about the Cancer Bridges or other support networks that exist? And reminding our medical professionals that while the medical treatment is really important, so is the treatment of the person and the spirit and the emotional self and the relationships and how those change. So I don't know what kind of relationships everybody here has. I don't know about domestic partners or friends or any of those kinds of things. So I'm going to keep it pretty general. But as we move through time and our bodies shift and change, it can feel uncomfortable to know how to interact with the outside world. So for example, even in my own home, I was having a brunch. A friend who is in survivorship from breast cancer treatment. She came and was surrounded by loads and loads of her friends and people who love her. And she came to me sort of midway through the event and said, I'm going to be leaving now. And so I followed her outside and said, hey, is everything okay? And she was in tears. And she said, well, I didn't want to cry at your brunch. And I said, well, my goodness, I mean, if you can cry anywhere, you can cry at my house. I work with people who cry all the time. That's no issue. And she was so conflicted. And then some of the things that she was describing going through included some of the folks at the event were just acquaintances, and they hadn't seen her in about a year, and she looks great. You wouldn't know that anything that she'd been through, anything significant. And she didn't know what to say to them. She didn't know what to say. She was at a party. She wanted to have fun. Did she really want to sort of let them know that she'd been through cancer treatment? She wasn't sure. She hadn't thought about that. And then in addition to that, she did actually feel like she was in a safe space. And in fact, that was kind of a problem for her because she wanted to go and have fun. She didn't want to go and cry and feel supported. She just wanted to feel like her regular self. And so being in a safe space was actually uncomfortable for her because it made it hard for her to sort of contain her own emotions. In addition to that, here she was surrounded by a bunch of people who know her and love her. And yet at the same time, she's been through a life-altering experience over the past year. And so she was explaining to me she's not sure that she knows that everybody still knows who she is. She's still trying to figure out who she is and how she feels about herself. And so that just was very confusing for her to be around people who love her, but may not really know her in the same way anymore. And so, of course, I, promised to speak to her at a later time so that, certainly wasn't going to make her come back in if that wasn't comfortable for her. But I think that these are some of the areas where people don't have a lot of opportunity to sort of express and explore that. My advice to her in this particular situation was that sure, she'd been caught off guard in this situation. She hadn't expected to feel this way. But I think a lot of times our emotions are that way, right? We don't always know how we're going to feel about what we're about to go through until we're in it. And then sometimes it feels a little bit too late. But I suggested to her that she go home and practice. What does she want to say in these kinds of situations? And not only practice what she wants to say, but also practice what what her intention is. Do you want people to know? Are you in a situation where you feel like, you know what, I have no interest in telling people what I've been going through, especially people that I don't know very well. So what do you say? Well, there's no right or wrong answer to that question. The answer is, well, whatever you're comfortable with. But the only way to get comfortable with figuring out what to say is to practice. And so nobody should feel shy about having these conversations with yourself in the privacy of your own home. And you can start to figure it out. And, you can even practice in a mirror if you like. And it can be a matter of figuring out how to open up the conversation and let people provide you with support and understanding. Or it can also be a way of just shutting that down. You don't want to talk about it? You don't want to talk about it. You don't have to. It's your choice. So, we can talk about some examples of that. I'm going to run to the chat here. Given that I will likely follow a similar path, do I visit mom again in all the ugliness of dying, or do I shield myself from this process? I think that's a really, really great question. And again, I hesitate to say that there is a right answer. I think it depends on your own self. I think a part of what I would want to talk about here, though, is how is it that we necessarily define dying as ugliness? And maybe unpacking that a little bit. death and dying is as much a part of life as any other part of life. And to bring judgment to it in that way is to, sort of imagine what it may be like, rather than sort of understanding that this is simply a part of being human. And it is a part of having a human body, a human spirit, a human mind. The fact that you even wonder about this is a demonstration of being human. And so I think it may be helpful to start to think about, what is it about the idea of death and dying that makes you feel so uncomfortable? And it may seem obvious, but I think that the answers are typically a lot more complicated. Okay, I see. Diapers, senility, pain, etc. Those kinds of things are what makes perhaps this particular situation feel ugly. One would hope that in the three examples that you provided, diapers, senility, and pain, pain would be one of the main focuses of any hospice treatment support. Pain is one of the things that is the first thing that is addressed. And so if you are witness to pain, or you're fearing your own pain, physical pain, then that would be something to be addressed ASAP with a medical professional. Things like diapers. I mean, the truth of the matter is that people who aren't undergoing cancer treatment, who aren't dying, actually have to use all kinds of things in order to live healthy, great, social lives. We perhaps carry some harsh judgments of ourselves, or embarrassment about the way our body works. And so I think a part of this might be working through how you feel about the way the body functions, and developing a level of comfort with just again, this idea of being human. Senility. Now, senility, if we're talking about dementia, can present in lots of different ways. If we're talking about the confusion of a particular disease process, then the issue there tends to be more that their behavioral changes of whatever a person is going through can be really hard to witness, because they are no longer the person that you've known, in this case, your mother, so your whole life. And so how do you cope with watching a person change in front of you, and no longer be the person that you've grown to love over time? And that's a really hard one. As a matter of fact, I'm doing another webinar for Friends of Dementia in Pennsylvania, and talking about specifically the grief of caring for folks with dementia. So that certainly is a topic in and of itself. But I think, again, stepping back and reminding ourselves that to be human means to, have to pee, have to poop, have to eat, have to breathe, have to do all of these things that are really natural and normal. And moving through the discomfort and the uncomfortable conversations to decide, what, okay, I have to wear a diaper, but if I wear a diaper, that means that I can, go out to the movies, or I can ride in a car instead of having to shut myself in my home, and, which is worse. And sort of making these very conscious decisions to really just not be too bothered with the way you're afraid that other people might treat you. And in fact, it's not always a fear. Some people do behave very badly, and to have lots of judgment and say ridiculous things. You know, I'm a grief specialist. I talk to people who are grieving all the time, and the things that people get told, it's really pretty unbelievable. So that does exist. I don't want to minimize the idea that you know, you might be forced to have some uncomfortable conversations, but I would just say keep in mind that that is a problem with that person, right? That's a real demonstration of their sort of, you know, either insensitivity or ignorance about, you know, the way things work. And you know, there's only so much that we can do to educate the world, but it can be a part of what you practice telling people about, right? If people ask you, you know, how's your cancer treatment going? Yeah, you can give them as many details as you feel comfortable providing, if you feel that it serves a purpose of helping people understand that, yeah, sometimes it is ugly, if you like, but it doesn't mean you have to stop living. It doesn't mean you should have to stay home and, you know, never go out in public. That doesn't sound fair at all. So again, if that makes sense, to sort of step back and think about why we feel the way we do about certain things. So sort of moving back into this idea of, do you go and visit? I think the question more accurately is, how will you feel if you don't? And is that something that you will regret? Living with regret is really hard, especially when a person is dying. In fact, I would say regret is one of the big red flags for me. When people say that, you know, they either guilt or shame, regret, these are the things that you carry in your heart. They can be a very, very heavy burden. And these are the kinds of things that are very challenging to resolve after a person dies. So you have this opportunity to examine that for yourself. Is this a space that you'll regret not going to visit? If it is, then I would say, work with Wendy and help develop a higher level of comfort with the situation that you're in, so that you can be fully present for your mom. And that may be a part of it, is reminding yourself that, you know, visiting with her it's also for her, and it's about her. And it's not really about you and what you're going through. And sometimes for folks, when they're going through their own really challenging situation, sometimes you can find some relief in being able to observe the challenges that other people are going through. And I don't mean that in a half, you know, glass half full kind of way, or, you know, silver lining kind of way. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that you get to take a little break from everything that you are going through, everything that is so present for you at every moment. And that's exhausting. And so sometimes it feels good to just take a little vacation from what you're going through to worry about something. Oh, I'm sorry. I did warn Wendy that this might happen, that my dog is going to need to leave my office. So I'm going to put myself on pause just for a second here. And I do apologize.
That's okay. Feel free to ask questions along if something pops in your mind. I know Jonathan asked a few questions, but everybody else, if you have questions, put them in the chat, or feel free to unmic and talk.
Hi, sorry about that.
Good.
And yes, please, I'm very happy to take other questions, or if you want me to even go in a different direction with this stuff, I can turn on a dime. That's no problem. But yeah, so anyway, I think we were on this idea that somehow being able to take a little break from your own experience can actually be a bit of a relief, and to put your own sort of stuff, we all have stuff that we carry with us through the world, and being able to put that on pause, whether it's to distract ourselves with with television or somebody else's problems or a walk in the woods, whatever it is. So that might be another way of framing that experience. I also like to remind people that sometimes when we're thinking about doing something that might seem to be a challenge for ourselves, where we're worried about how we're going to respond and how we're going to react, oftentimes the anticipation or the dread of that thing, that's the kind of worst part. We imagine that we know what it's going to be like. We imagine we know how we're going to feel, and we kind of live in that space for longer than we need to. And then we go and we do the thing, and maybe it's not, great, but it's often not quite as bad as we anticipate it's going to be. And then it's done, right? And then we will have done that thing, and it's over. So sometimes we can, what I kind of like to call, manipulate ourselves into doing things that we otherwise aren't so interested in doing, because we know that we'll regret if we don't do it. And you can just sort of talk yourself into, well, okay, I'm sitting here dreading it. I might as well just get it done, because otherwise I'm just going to sit here and think about it until I finally move. And that kind of dread and anticipation, I don't know, I think that's really unpleasant to have to kind of live in. But I will also say, when we're moving into shifting relationships, and I can talk more on that topic, or I'm gonna sort of turn, but if I didn't answer the question, or if you want to continue. Okay, does anyone else have issues with people assuming you are doing great physically because you have your hair or look good on the outside? Some of my friends think I couldn't possibly have terminal cancer. Very weird. That's from Alex. And I can certainly speak to this a little bit, but if anybody else would like to jump in. We got a from Jonathan. Alex, and I don't think you're alone. And I tell you, I work, my other group is, as Wendy mentioned, the folks with malignant brain tumors. And
I've got 2 in my head, but because I look good, I'm doing fine.
Yes. And we talk about that a lot in our group, because they look great. And then also, how do you sort of respond to folks out in public? They think you're perfectly healthy, but you may be more forgetful, or you may have some behavioral challenges sometimes, with things going on in your brain. How do you explain that to people? Do you have to explain that to people, right? Your medical information is your own business. It's not any of their business, but you also want people to know that there's an explanation, right? That this is outside of who you consider yourself to be in your, when you don't have things going on in your brain. So again, that is a space where you can make some very concrete decisions about, how do I want to have these conversations? Who do I want to have them with? Who do I care about? If the person at the drugstore behind the counter thinks I'm flaky, do I really care? No. Do I need to have this conversation with them? No. Or you might say, well, you know what, this is a good opportunity for me to do some public education. And if they treat me like I'm being unreasonable, then I can let them know. I can say, hey, I appreciate that you think I'm being unreasonable. I have a brain tumor, and that impacts the way that I respond. And I think you should understand that. So as you see, those are 2 radically different ways of handling that kind of situation. And it depends on your own comfort level with that. But these assumptions, I think, Alex, that your friends simply don't want it to be true. And
Yeah, they don't want me to die, so they're like, oh, you have to be wrong. That's
Right.
not possible. You look good. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of a way to shut you up about it. I think they're in denial.
Yeah. I suspect that you're right. I don't know your friends, so I can't speak from you know, their personal selves, but that's what I encounter more often than not, is that they don't know what to say. They don't know how to feel, and they don't know how to talk to you about that. And so one thing that I might advise or explore with you is whether or not you would be comfortable saying, hey, you know what? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about how you feel. I want to know what you're going through. I hear that you're telling me you don't think I'm sick, but I am sick, and I need your support. So why don't you tell me how you're feeling? I don't know if you would be comfortable with that, Alex, but I think it would start to address how they're treating you, right? Again, these
Think with guys, yeah, it's just hard because usually you just play like video games or you help them out with projects, but actually talking is not something our society ever taught us to do. So I don't really know what they don't know what to say. You know, like it's just kind of this awkward silence that is morphed into let's just pretend it's not there.
Right. Yes. You know, people are really surprised to hear that my grief counseling population is about 50-50 men and women. Men do think about these things, and they do want to talk about these things. They may not know how, and it may not be easy for them. But Alex, I want to, you know, sort of push you a little bit on this idea that, yeah, it's hard. There's an elephant in the room. So which is harder? Is it harder to start a conversation, or is it hard to ignore what's actually going on? Right.
I don't know. The elephant in the room seems pretty big right now. So like it's kind of more annoying right now.
Exactly, which is why I think it can be very helpful to talk about, even if it's uncomfortable. Of course, I'm the queen of uncomfortable conversations. So it's something you have to practice. And this is why I keep saying, like, you know, just go home and practice in the mirror, practice with whoever will listen to you. You can, if you have one friend who you feel like you can confide in, you know, take that one friend and say, oh, I really need to talk about this with the other guys. Can you please help me figure out what to say? And, you know, and you two can hash it out. And it may be that you have a friend who can be sort of a buffer with your other friends, right? So you can go to this one person. It's sort of like the telephone tree. You go to this one person and you figure out what it is that you want people to know and understand, and that they can start putting out some of the feelers so that the responsibility isn't firmly and only on you, because that can be pretty heavy too. So you might have some friends who can help facilitate or at least open the door for some of those conversations. But what I can tell you is that coming from the other side of this, hearing from people who are grieving the death of somebody that they really cared about, one of the biggest regrets that they have is that they didn't have these conversations. They didn't know how to have these conversations. They didn't know how to open them. They didn't know how to make them happen. And the opportunity is gone. So I just would really encourage you to see if you can find a moment or a way to start talking about that elephant in the room, because it's there, right? It's absolutely there. There's been some really
I forget things, and then they'll just gloss over it and pretend, but everybody knows it's a brain tumor that's causing it. Like I know how to fix shit. I know how to do stuff, and like my symptoms are getting worse, and they can see it. And then we all pretend I'm just going senile or something.
Right. Well, I mean, you can start reminding them. You can say, oh, I just had a brain tumor moment. You know, if you want to try to bring some humor to it, humor can go a very, very long way in some of these situations. You know, I throw out these examples of things that you can say, knowing that you can, you'll come up with your own words. But maybe you just decide to make sure that every opportunity that you have to sort of fit that into regular conversation, so that it becomes a part of something that is not so hard to talk about, because you're talking about it all the time, even if it's in a lighthearted kind of way. That may be one way of opening up, starting to open those doors. There's been some recent research that I thought was really fascinating, where the researchers were looking at stress levels, and they were looking at the stress levels of the person who has cancer and living with it, and then the people around them, and who were either caretaking or had a significant role in the person's life. And what they found was that the stress level was just about 50-50 in between the people who care about them and they're watching the decline, the person who's declining. So, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. Very often we're worried about burdening others with what we think and how we feel. But often it's also the reverse. And they don't want to burden you with what they think or what they feel, but it's actually not a burden. It actually really helps to relieve the stress and provide connection. And, it's not something you have to talk about every minute of every day. Once you open that door and have some conversations, then it can move back to the space of, video games and, discussing the latest movies or news. Oh, nobody needs to talk about news these days, but, it can move in and out of that space. But not talking about the elephant in the room, it creates a barrier, right? It creates space between you and this person that you can't talk about yourself with, right? Because right now, this is what you're going through. This is your life. And if there's whole parts of your life and yourself that you are not allowed to talk about, then it's really hard to connect with another person in a meaningful way. So unfortunately, I think it's, really about giving other people the permission to tell you, how sad they are that you're going through this, and that they're going to miss you, and all of the things that they don't want to think about, but they are thinking about them, right? That's why they can't talk about it. It's because they are thinking about it. So often we're afraid that what we're going to say is going to make other people feel some kind of way. But more often than not, people are already feeling that way. We don't, it's not provided by us. We're simply addressing the facts. And I don't know, does that help at all, Alex?
Yeah.
I know, I wish I had a magic pill. I wish, I wish there was some magic way to make this really comfortable for everybody. And I think this is a part of the reason why I do the podcast that I do, so that the information is out there for the people on the other side, right? For the people like your friends who don't know what to say, who don't know what to do, but want to do something.
Never seen anything like this before, like,
right.
We're all in our 30s and 40s, so like I'm in my 40s, but still like, this is like a first for them.
Yeah. And you would be surprised, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there is no age that I've found yet that makes you immune from having people around you who have no idea what to do or say. And it is very unfair, right? Because that makes the burden, in order for you to have your needs met, which is just basically just to have your friends, right? Be your friends. You're not asking for anything extraordinary. But it's very unfair that you're the one going through the stressful situation, and yet you're also the one that has to kind of bridge that gap. In an ideal world, they would have some really good understanding, and they would be so, supportive and open and generous. But if it's not happening, it's not happening, and so that then becomes your responsibility. And the trade-off is not doing this thing or not having the close connection. And I think most of us would agree it's better to have a hard conversation than it is to miss out on that friendship, because these people sound like they're important to you, and you're clearly important to them, or they wouldn't care, right? Yeah. I would encourage you to open those doors. In whatever creative ways, and especially, if you're getting forgetful and you're noticing some changes, these are things that probably need to be talked about sooner rather than later. Just in it being realistic.
Yeah, one of them said, well, it's all good. They just got to zap you again, and then it'll go back to normal.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, eventually the zapping stops working, like, I don't know when that's going to happen, but, but instead I'm like, yeah, and then it'll go back to normal, and I say nothing. Right. So, yeah.
Well, the truth of the matter is, no matter what, even if they could zap you to, zap these tumors to oblivion, your life will never go back to where it was, because you have been through this life-changing experience. And I think this might be a really important point to make, is that as things change, we have to say goodbye to certain parts of our old life, and those changes are permanent, right? Even if we're talking about survivorship and being cancer-free, you have been through a cancer experience, and that changes everything about who you are. And so rather than trying to think of yourself as a version of yourself that is lesser than, and I do hear that, right? I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. The idea is to allow yourself simply to be the person who you are now. And the person who you are now is worth loving, is good enough, does deserve to have a life outside of their house. And yeah, you have to get to know yourself again, and your friends and the people that love you need to also learn how to continue to get to know you as you move through life. This is, letting go of the idea that you should be a stagnant, person who never changes. Whether it's in the context of medical treatment or, any other life experience, right? Going to school, that changes you forever. Traveling to a foreign country, that can change you. All kinds of things can change us in our lives. And this is why I call it twilight grief, right? Because we often grieve these pieces along the way, pieces of ourselves that change and will never be back to what they were. But just because things change doesn't mean that there's no more hope, that there's no more joy, that there's no more laughter, that there's no more goodness, or that there's something wrong, that you're a worse version of yourself, going through adversity. This is how we develop wisdom, right? Experience. You understand things that other people don't understand. And that's really valuable. Again, this is not a silver lining talk. But it is a fact, right? You have been through an experience that, Alex, as you're saying, your friends have no idea. You are in uncharted territory for them. And so, if you can sort of cultivate a little bit of compassion for the fact that they're so lost, that might help you find some words to share with them a little bit about your experience and what you're going through. Because even though it's hard for them to hear, it will be good for them to learn, and they'll treasure the words that you share with them at some point in their own lives, and then they'll do better the next time.
I gotta train you.
Yeah, I know, right? How fair is that? It's terrible. People should, I don't know, maybe there should be a class in school on how to be supportive, how to be a supportive friend to somebody who's experiencing, medical issues.
Should be maybe empathy 101.
Empathy 101, exactly. I would sign up for that class. That sounds. Until then, you all are the teachers. Unfortunately, it's a very poorly paid position. I understand.
Yeah, there's a lot of downsides.
There's a lot of downsides to it. Yeah. But one way of thinking about it is it does help to define your legacy, right? And how you'll be remembered and how you'll be cherished.
Let's talk a little bit about legacy. I think that's something really important that I talk about with clients that I think a lot of you probably are interested in, and thinking about how do I leave a legacy? How do I even begin to think about a legacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess we have 6 minutes.
6 minutes to talk about.
Maybe I should have addressed this earlier. Yeah, so legacy is the story that we leave behind. And what you can think about is, well, when I go, I can either let the people who have been around me make up my story, or I can have some control over what is said about me when it's my time. And so there's lots and lots of ways of developing your own legacy. And I think a lot of it has to do with, there's some soul searching, right? How do you want the world to remember you? Do you want the world to remember you? Not everybody does. What are the thoughts and feelings? What are the stories? What are the things that you want to leave behind? I worked with one young guy who had to leave his apartment because he could no longer care for himself. And so he had a big party at his apartment and had all of his friends come and pick out the things that reminded them of him. And it was something that he really appreciated. And I think that his friends probably did too. Was it uncomfortable? I imagine there were some uncomfortable moments in that, but there was also real connection. And it was really beautiful for him to be able to see, what are the things that, that this particular friend, what is it about me that they want to hold on to? And that helped him define his own story for himself of who he is and the way he's touched and had an impact on the world. Many of us have no idea the extent of the things that we say, the words that we've shared, the love that we've given, the friendships that we've made, how the ripple effect of that moves out through our community. And so to be able to have some understanding of that before we die can be a real gift. That you can write yourself letters, you can start sending people text messages or emails, you can do videotapes, record your voice, you can either give away some things or earmark. You don't have to give away anything if you're still using it. You can write a list. I want this thing to go to this person and this thing to go to that person. Or you can ask people, what of my stuff do you want? I'm going to make a list. So if you want to get on my list, you need to come and talk to me. You need to come and talk, and I'm going to tell you a story about who I am. And, you know, and I want you to come and, you know, be with me a little bit, and then you get to be on my list of things that I'm giving away, right? I mean, however you want to do it. But the idea of leaving pieces of ourselves with the people that we love. I remind people that we do not go through life without giving pieces of ourselves to other people and having other people fill us with themselves as well. So as much as you can do to share that and have a little bit of control over it, the direction of it, you know, plant your own memorial garden if you like, if that's how you want to be remembered. Buy yourself the bench in the park, that place, that path that you like to walk. You know, you can make a plan for yourself to make sure that there's a place where people can rest, because you understand how important that was on your own journey, these kinds of things. I don't know. Does that touch on it at least a little bit, Wendy?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Does anybody have any questions around that topic? Okay.
Or anything else that I can help with?
Anything else? I'm going to stop the recording so I can bring you all back in the screen here.